American planes would attack the North's airfields, power plants, and industries, while the Navy's Operation Sea Dragon would be expanded. It was a major step towards an all-out campaign. The U.S. and Australian warships of Operation Sea Dragon were allowed to extend operations from 19 to 20 degrees north. Aircraft were sent to mine river mouths and later inland waterways as well, up to the same line. Haiphong Harbor, however, the North's most important port, would not be mined until 1972 to avoid the risk of sinking Soviet ships. The new targets for U.S. bombers were the airfields, power plants, and industries of the northeastern quadrant. Some targets were inside the previously prohibited zones around Hanoi and Haiphong. The American attacks on North Vietnam's airfields began on April 24, 1967. By the end of the year, all but one of the North's MiG bases had been hit. The attacks inflicted heavy damage on runways and installations. There were furious air combats over Hanoi and Haiphong as every available MiG was thrown into action. After the airfield attacks came the strikes on industrial targets and power plants. 32% of the North's electrical power generating capacity was cut, but the remaining plants were adequate to supply most of the North's small industrial plants. By now, the weather had improved, and the bombers now ranged freely, hitting old and new targets again and again. In May 1967, as desperate battles raged in the skies over Hanoi and Haiphong, the Americans shot down 26 North Vietnamese fighters. North Vietnam's pilot strength had been halved. While the latest offensive against North Vietnam was still underway, in Washington a bitter argument was raging about strategy in Vietnam. President Johnson's civilian and military advisors were now completely at odds. The military wanted a major escalation of the air and ground war in an all-out push for victory. The civilians, especially Robert McNamara, were calling for the war effort to be leveled off. In August 1967, the pressure on President Johnson to side with his military commanders sharply increased. A Senate subcommittee was about to call for much heavier bombing of North Vietnam. To head off criticism, Johnson approved a sharp escalation in Rolling Thunder. For the Defense Secretary, Robert McNamara, the decision to escalate was the end of the road. His advice had been ignored, and plainly, he no longer had the confidence of the President. McNamara had no option but to resign.